A millionaire saw a mother and her twin girls crying on the street. What they revealed about their home left him in tears. And before we continue, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Enjoy the story. The city buzzed with its usual chaos, honking cars, hurried footsteps, and muffled conversations blending into a cacophony that filled the air. It was a crisp evening, and the streets of downtown gleamed under the soft glow of streetlights. Among the hurried passers-by, no one seemed to notice the small, heartbreaking scene unfolding on the corner of Main Street. A woman no older than her mid-30s sat on the cold, unforgiving concrete with her twin daughters huddled close. The three of them looked worn, as if life had been pressing them down for far too long. The twins, no older than 6, clung to their mother's sides, their wide eyes filled with confusion and fatigue. One held a small, tattered doll, its stitching frayed, while the other fiddled with a loose thread on her sleeve. Their faces were smeared with dirt, and though they tried to stay strong, tears occasionally escaped, rolling silently down their cheeks. James Whitmore, a man who had spent years building his fortune and guarding his heart, was walking briskly toward his car when the sight stopped him in his tracks. He wasn't the kind of man to pause in the middle of his busy schedule, but something about the family struck him. Maybe it was the way the mother's arms encircled her daughters, protective even in their despair. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes, exhaustion laced with a stubborn determination not to give up. He adjusted his coat against the evening chill and hesitated for a moment. His instinct told him to walk away. After all, he didn't know their story, and it wasn't his business. But a nagging voice in the back of his mind refused to let him move. Memories of his own past, of nights filled with uncertainty and a mother who sacrificed everything, flooded his thoughts. Without fully understanding why, he found himself walking toward them. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice cutting through the background noise of the street. "Is everything all right?" The woman looked up abruptly, her eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of shame. "We're fine," she said quickly, her tone defensive. She pulled her daughters closer, as if shielding them from yet another stranger who might look down on them. James crouched down to her level, trying to make himself less intimidating. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly, "but you look like you could use some help." The twins stared at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. One of them, the one clutching the doll, finally spoke up. "We're waiting for Daddy," she said, her voice small and trembling. "He's coming back soon." The woman's face tightened at her daughter's words, and she quickly looked away. James noticed the subtle clench of her jaw, the way her hands gripped her daughter's shoulders just a little tighter. He could tell there was more to the story, but he didn't press. "Where are you staying tonight?" James asked, his tone careful. He didn't want to overwhelm her, but the thought of these 2 little girls sleeping out in the cold made his chest ache. The woman hesitated, then answered in a barely audible voice. "In the car. It's not ideal, but it's all we have." James nodded, his mind racing. He wanted to help, but he knew offering money outright might offend her. Instead, he gestured toward the diner across the street. "How about a warm meal? My treat." The woman hesitated again, her pride warring with her need to take care of her daughters. Finally, she nodded, her voice trembling as she said, "Thank you. That's very kind." The girls brightened at the mention of food, their exhaustion momentarily giving way to excitement. James stood and offered his hand to help the woman up. She hesitated before taking it, and as she rose, she gave him a faint smile. "I'm Clara," she said, introducing herself for the first time. "And these are my daughters, Sophie and Emma." James returned her smile. "It's nice to meet you, Clara. I'm James." As they crossed the street and entered the diner, the warmth of the room enveloped them. The twins immediately perked up, their eyes darting to the rows of booths and the smell of food wafting through the air. The waitress approached, her expression softening as she took in the sight of the family. "What can I get for you?" she asked, pulling out her notepad. "Whatever they want," James said, glancing at Clara. "Order anything. Don't hold back." Clara hesitated, then ordered modestly, grilled cheese sandwiches for the girls and a simple bowl of soup for herself. James added a few extras to the order, including hot chocolate for the twins. When the food arrived, Sophie and Emma dug in with enthusiasm, their laughter filling the small booth as they chatted about the funny shapes in their hot chocolate foam. For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. James watched them quietly, his thoughts drifting back to his own childhood. He remembered sitting in a similar diner with his mother, scraping together enough change for a single meal. The memory brought a lump to his throat. He cleared it quickly, not wanting to show too much emotion. "You're doing an amazing job," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Clara looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" James gestured toward the twins, who were now giggling over a shared joke. "They're happy because of you. It's clear how much you love them." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I'm just trying to hold everything together," she admitted. "Some days, I don't know how much longer I can." James leaned forward, his expression sincere. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And sometimes, it's okay to let someone help. You don't have to do this alone." Clara didn't respond right away, but something in James's words seemed to reach her. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for her daughters, but for herself. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave, James made a silent promise to himself. This wouldn't be the last time he helped this family. There was something about them that felt deeply personal, as if fate had placed them in his path for a reason. And while he didn't yet know how, he was determined to make a difference in their lives. The diner hummed with the quiet murmur of other patrons and the clink of dishes being cleared away. James, Clara, and the twins sat in a cozy corner booth by the window. Outside, the city bustled on, but inside, the warmth and the smell of freshly cooked food created a temporary cocoon of comfort. The waitress returned with a tray laden with their food. She set down 2 plates of grilled cheese sandwiches in front of Sophie and Emma, a steaming bowl of soup in front of Clara, and a generous slice of apple pie that James had sneakily added to the order. The girls' eyes widened at the sight of the food, their faces lighting up in a way that tugged at James's heart. "Thank you," Sophie said, her voice brimming with excitement. Emma echoed her sister, clutching her sandwich with both hands as if it were the greatest treasure she'd ever seen. "You're very welcome," James replied, his smile soft. "Enjoy." Clara hesitated for a moment before picking up her spoon. She glanced at James, her expression a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. "You didn't have to do all this," she said quietly, stirring her soup. "I don't want you to think we're taking advantage." James waved her concern away. "It's just a meal, Clara," he said gently. "Everyone deserves a warm meal and a little kindness. No strings attached." Clara nodded, but her shoulders remained tense. She sipped her soup slowly, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. James noticed her glancing toward the window every few seconds, as if half expecting someone to burst in and take this small moment of peace away. "Tell me about yourselves," James said, breaking the silence. "What's your story?" Clara hesitated, her spoon hovering over her bowl. "It's not much of a story," she said after a moment. "Just bad luck, I guess." James didn't push, sensing her reluctance. Instead, he shifted his focus to the twins, who were happily munching on their sandwiches. "And what about you two? What's the best part of your day so far?" Sophie grinned, her face lighting up with innocence and joy. "The hot chocolate," she exclaimed. "It's so yummy." Emma nodded in agreement, her mouth full of grilled cheese. "And the nice man," she added, pointing at James. James laughed softly, touched by their simple honesty. "Well, I'm glad I could be part of your best day," he said. Clara watched the interaction, a faint smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, in what felt like forever, her daughters looked genuinely happy. It was a sight she hadn't realized how much she missed. As the girls finished their meal, Clara finally set her spoon down and sighed. "I lost my husband 6 months ago," she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with pain. "It was sudden, an accident. One day he was here, and the next he wasn't." James's expression softened. "I'm so sorry," he said sincerely. Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the table. "He left behind a lot of debt," she continued. "I didn't even know how bad it was until the bills started piling up. We lost the house, the car, everything. And now here we are." James listened intently, his chest tightening as he took in her story. It was eerily familiar, a mirror of his own childhood struggles. He remembered watching his mother cry over unpaid bills, the way she tried to shield him from their financial troubles, even when there was no escaping them. "You've been through so much," James said after a moment, "but you're still standing. That takes strength." Clara gave a small, humorless laugh. "Strength," she repeated. "I don't feel very strong most days. I'm just trying to keep it together for my girls." "That's what makes you strong," James replied. "You're doing everything you can for them. That's all that matters." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You don't even know us." James hesitated, his gaze dropping to the coffee cup in his hands. "Because someone once did the same for me," he admitted. "When I was a kid, my mom and I were in a situation not too different from yours. Someone gave us a chance, and it changed everything. I guess I'm just trying to pay it forward." Clara was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "Well," she said finally, her voice soft, "thank you. For the food, for listening, for everything." James nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I could help." As the meal wound down, the twins started to yawn, their excitement giving way to exhaustion. James noticed and glanced at Clara. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated, her eyes flickering with embarrassment. "In the car," she admitted. "It's not ideal, but it's safe enough." James's jaw tightened. "That's no place for them, or for you," he said firmly. "Look, I know we've just met, but I have an idea. Let me put you up in a motel for a few nights, at least until we figure something out. You need a real place to rest." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but James held up a hand. "It's not charity," he said. "Think of it as an investment. In you, in your family." Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay," she said, "just for a few nights." James smiled, relief washing over him. "Let's get you settled." As they left the diner and walked back to Clara's car, James felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about a meal or a place to sleep. It was about giving a family a second chance. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of their journey together. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of the modest motel room where Clara and her daughters had spent the night. For the first time in months, she woke up to the sound of her girls giggling instead of their quiet whispers of discomfort in the back seat of their car. The mattress beneath her felt like a luxury compared to the cramped car seats she had grown accustomed to, and for a fleeting moment, Clara allowed herself to breathe. "Mommy, look." Sophie called from the small table by the window. She held up a piece of motel stationery with a crayon drawing of a house. "This is going to be our new home." Clara smiled, her heart aching at her daughter's optimism. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, crossing the room to hug Sophie and Emma. "One day, we'll have a home just like that." As the girls played with their crayons, Clara's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up to see a message from James. "Good morning, Clara. I'll be at the motel in an hour. Let's talk about the next steps." Clara stared at the message, feeling a mix of gratitude and apprehension. James had already done so much for them, more than she could have ever expected. But she couldn't shake the nagging thought. Why would a stranger go so far for her family? Exactly 1 hour later, a knock sounded at the door. Clara opened it to find James standing there, holding a folder and 2 large paper bags that smelled deliciously of breakfast. "Good morning," he said with a smile, stepping inside. "I figured you all could use a hot meal to start the day." Clara hesitated, but stepped aside to let him in. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, closing the door behind him. James shrugged, setting the bags on the small table. "It's just food," he said. "And trust me, these pancakes are worth it." The twins squealed with excitement as James unpacked the bags, revealing stacks of pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh fruit. They eagerly dug in, their laughter filling the room as syrup dripped onto their plates. Clara couldn't help but smile at the sight. "Sit down, Clara," James said, pulling out the chair across from him and gesturing for her to join him. "I brought something else too." He tapped the folder he'd brought. Clara sat, her curiosity piqued. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the folder. James opened it and pulled out several neatly arranged papers. "This is a plan," he explained. "I know you've been through a lot, and I can't imagine how hard it's been. But I think we can get you back on your feet." Clara frowned slightly, leaning forward. "James, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't want charity," she said firmly. "This isn't charity," James replied, his tone calm but resolute. "It's an opportunity. Let me explain." He spread out the papers on the table, showing her a list of resources his foundation provided. Temporary housing programs, job placement assistance, child care services, and financial literacy workshops. "My foundation is designed to help families like yours rebuild," James said. "We cover the essentials while you focus on finding stability, housing, job training, childcare. It's not a handout, it's a partnership." Clara stared at the papers, overwhelmed. This sounds too good to be true," she murmured. "It's real," James assured her. "And it works. I've seen it change lives." "But why me?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because I see myself in you," he admitted. "When I was a kid, my mom and I were in a similar situation. We had nothing, and someone stepped in to help us. That one act of kindness changed the course of my life. I want to pay it forward." Clara looked down at the papers, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "I don't know what to say," she said finally. "Say yes," James said simply. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "And what happens if I mess it up?" "You won't," James said confidently. "But even if things get tough, I'll be here to help. You're not alone in this." Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing. She thought about the nights spent in the car, the look of disappointment in her daughter's eyes when she couldn't give them more, the feeling of failure that clung to her every day. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break they needed. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll do it." James smiled, relief evident on his face. "Good," he said. "Let's start today." The rest of the morning was a blur of paperwork and planning. James guided Clara through the initial steps of enrolling in the Foundation's program, explaining each part of the process. By the time they finished, Clara felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in months. As James prepared to leave, Sophie and Emma ran up to him with another drawing. This one showed the 3 of them with James standing under a bright sun. "This is for you," Emma said, handing him the picture. James knelt down to their level, taking the drawing with a smile. "Thank you," he said warmly. "I'll keep it forever." Clara watched the interaction, her heart full. For the first time, in what felt like forever, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. But as James left the motel and Clara began to pack up their things, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her stomach tightening when she saw the unfamiliar number. Answering cautiously, she was met with a voice that sent a chill down her spine. "Clara," the voice drawled, low and menacing. "It's been a while." Her breath caught. "Frank," she whispered. "Don't think you can run from me," Frank said coldly. "You know better than that." Clara's hand trembled as she gripped the phone, her newfound hope threatening to slip away. But this time, she wasn't going to face it alone. The drive to the new apartment was quiet, except for the excited chatter of Sophie and Emma in the back seat. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The folder James had given her rested on top of her belongings, its contents a mix of hope and uncertainty. James drove in silence, respecting the mix of emotions that hung in the air. "Are we really getting a new house, Mommy?" Emma asked, her voice bright with excitement. Clara turned to look at her daughters, forcing a smile. "It's not a house, sweetheart. It's an apartment," she said gently. "But yes, it'll be our new home for now." James glanced at her from the corner of his eye, catching the flicker of doubt in her expression. "It's more than just a roof," he said, his voice steady. "It's a chance to rebuild." They pulled up in front of the apartment building, a modest but well-kept structure with neatly trimmed bushes and a clean facade. Clara's breath caught as she took it in. She hadn't expected anything so welcoming, so normal. James parked the car and stepped out, walking around to open the door for Clara. "Come on," he said, his tone light. "I want you to see it." Clara nodded, taking Emma's hand while Sophie clutched her other side. Together, they followed James to the front door, where a property manager greeted them with a warm smile. "Mrs. Hayes," the woman asked, extending a hand to Clara. Clara hesitated before shaking her hand. "Yes, that's me," she said softly. "I'm Sarah," the manager said. "Welcome to your new home." Clara blinked, her throat tightening. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. Sarah handed her a set of keys, then gestured for them to follow her up the stairs. The apartment was on the second floor, and as they stepped inside, Clara's heart raced. The space was small but cozy, with a living room that opened into a compact kitchen. The furniture was simple: a couch, a coffee table, a small dining set, but it was more than Clara had dared to hope for. Sophie and Emma darted past her, squealing with delight as they explored. They ran into the bedroom, their voices echoing down the hall. "Mommy, look," Sophie called. "There are 2 beds." Clara followed their voices and found them jumping up and down on the twin beds, their laughter filling the room. The sight made her chest tighten, tears welling in her eyes. "They're happy," James said quietly, standing behind her. Clara wiped her eyes quickly and turned to face him. "This is more than I ever imagined," she admitted. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," James replied. "This is just the beginning." As the twins continued to explore, James led Clara back to the living room and gestured for her to sit. He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and laid them on the coffee table. "This is the plan we talked about," he said, pointing to a list at the top of the first page. "The rent is covered for the next 6 months. That should give you enough time to find stable work. The foundation will also provide childcare for the girls, so you won't have to worry about them while you're at work." Clara nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the documents. "And after 6 months?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "After 6 months, you'll take over the rent," James explained, "but we'll still be here to support you. The goal is to help you become independent, not to leave you stranded." Clara looked up at him, her expression conflicted. "I'm grateful, James. Truly. But what if I fail?" "You won't," James said firmly. "You've already proven how strong you are. You've been holding your family together through impossible circumstances. This is just a step towards something better." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said quietly. "Good," James said, a small smile crossing his face. "Because I believe in you." The rest of the afternoon was spent going over details. James helped Clara set up appointments with the Foundation's career counselors and gave her contact information for local employers who were hiring. He also arranged for the twins to start at a nearby daycare, ensuring they'd have a safe and nurturing environment while Clara worked. By the time the sun began to set, Clara felt a cautious sense of hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there, growing steadily with every step she took. That evening, as James prepared to leave, Sophie and Emma ran up to him with a drawing they had made while exploring the apartment. It showed a bright yellow sun shining over a small family of stick figures, with James standing beside them. "This is for you," Emma said, holding it out proudly. James knelt down to their level, taking the drawing with a smile. "Thank you," he said warmly. "I'll treasure it." As he walked to the door, Clara followed him, her hands twisting nervously. "James," she said softly, stopping him before he stepped outside. He turned to face her, his expression curious. "What is it?" I need you to know how much this means to me," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I don't know why you chose to help us, but I promise I won't let you down." James smiled, his eyes kind. "You're not letting anyone down, Clara. You're doing this for your girls. That's all that matters." Clara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome," James replied. "And remember, you're not alone in this." As he walked away, Clara stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the evening light. For the first time, in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that things could get better. This apartment wasn't just a place to stay. It was a chance to start over, to build a life where her daughters could thrive. But as she turned back toward the living room, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She picked it up, her stomach dropping when she saw the unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Hesitating, she answered. "Clara," a voice drawled, low and menacing. "Did you really think you could escape me?" Her breath caught in her throat. "Frank," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You can't run from me," he said coldly. "You know that. I'll find you, no matter where you go." The line went dead, leaving Clara standing frozen in the kitchen. The fragile hope she had felt only moments ago seemed to tremble under the weight of Frank's threat. But this time, she wasn't going to face it alone. The night after Frank's chilling phone call was one of the longest Clara had endured in months. She sat in the small kitchen of her new apartment, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of the wind outside. Sophie and Emma were fast asleep in their room, their soft breathing a reminder of what was at stake. Clara couldn't stop replaying Frank's words in her mind. "You can't run from me. I'll find you." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the table. She wanted to believe that this new beginning was real, that Frank couldn't take it away from her, but doubt clung to her like a shadow. She reached for her phone and hesitated, her finger hovering over James's number. Was it too much to ask for his help again? But deep down, she knew she couldn't face this alone. Taking a deep breath, she dialed. It didn't take long for James to answer. His voice was calm, steady. "Clara, is everything okay?" "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Frank called me." There was a pause on the other end of the line before James spoke again, his tone hardening. "What did he say?" He threatened me," Clara admitted. "He said I couldn't escape him, that he'd find me no matter where I go." James's silence was heavy, but when he spoke again, his words were resolute. "He's not going to touch you or the girls. I'll make sure of it." Clara wanted to believe him, but fear lingered in her chest. "He's dangerous, James," she said. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Then it's time we find out," James replied. I'm going to look into him, see what we're dealing with. In the meantime, I've already arranged for private security to monitor the building. You and the girls are safe here." "Thank you," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to repay you for all of this." "You don't have to," James said softly. "Just focus on your girls. I'll handle the rest." The following morning, James met with Clara at the Foundation's office. He had spent the night digging into Frank's background, using his extensive network to uncover the truth about the man who had haunted Clara's life for so long. Now, he was ready to share what he had found. "Clara," he began, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "There's something you need to know about Frank." Her heart raced as she leaned forward. "What is it?" James placed a stack of papers on the desk between them. "Frank isn't just a manipulative businessman," he explained. "He's been involved in a lot of shady dealings, predatory loans, illegal property takeovers, intimidation tactics. He's built a career out of preying on vulnerable people." Clara's stomach churned. "I knew he was bad, but this..." James nodded grimly. "He's dangerous, but he's also sloppy. He's left a trail, and I've already contacted a legal team to start building a case against him." "A case?" Clara asked, her voice laced with both hope and doubt. "You think we can take him down?" "I don't just think so, I know we can," James said. "But it won't happen overnight. In the meantime, we need to stay vigilant." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. "What do I need to do?" "Just focus on building your new life," James said. "Let me handle Frank. I've already got people keeping an eye on him, and if he makes a move, we'll know." That evening, as Clara prepared dinner for Sophie and Emma, she tried to push her fears to the back of her mind. The girls sat at the small dining table, coloring pictures and chatting about their day. Their laughter was a soothing balm, a reminder of why she couldn't let Frank win. "Mommy, can we hang our pictures on the wall?" Sophie asked, holding up a brightly colored drawing of their new apartment. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with love. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make this place feel like home." As the girls taped their drawings to the wall, Clara felt a flicker of hope. She was doing this for them, for their future. She wouldn't let Frank take it away. Meanwhile, James received a call from one of his contacts. "We've got eyes on Frank," the voice on the other end said. "He's been seen near the apartment building. He's watching." James's grip on the phone tightened. "Do not let him get close," he ordered. "If he steps foot near Clara or her daughters, I want to know immediately." "Yes, sir," the voice replied. "We'll keep him under surveillance." Hanging up, James sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Frank wasn't just a threat to Clara. He was a challenge to everything James had worked for. This wasn't just about protecting one family anymore. It was about standing up to a man who thrived on fear and control. That night, as Clara tucked Sophie and Emma into bed, she whispered a silent prayer. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. James's support gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. But just as she began to drift off to sleep, her phone buzzed again. Her heart sank as she read the message on the screen. "This isn't over, Clara. I'm coming for what's mine." Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at the words. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but instead, she took a deep breath and dialed James's number. When he answered, she could barely get the words out. "He texted me," she said, her voice shaking. "He's not stopping. Listen to me," James said firmly. "He won't get to you. I promise." Clara clung to his words, her fear slowly giving way to determination. She wasn't the same woman who had been forced out of her home, who had slept in her car and cried herself to sleep. She had found strength she didn't know she had, and she wasn't going to let Frank take it away. As the night wore on, Clara sat in the quiet of her apartment, watching over her daughters as they slept. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She would fight for her family, no matter what it took. And for the first time, she felt like she had a real chance to win. The next morning, Clara woke to the faint sound of Sophie and Emma giggling in their room. The light streaming through the curtains felt warm and reassuring, but the tension from the previous night still lingered. Frank's message replayed in her mind like a broken record, the words chilling her to the bone. She sat up and reached for her phone, checking for updates from James. No new messages. Part of her felt relieved, but another part longed for reassurance. She knew James was doing everything he could, but the weight of Frank's threats felt heavier than ever. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. She had 2 little girls depending on her. "Mommy, can we have pancakes?" Sophie asked, running into the room and jumping onto the bed. Clara forced a smile, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Sure, sweetheart. Let me get dressed first." In the kitchen, Clara tried to focus on the simple act of making breakfast. The smell of sizzling butter and the sound of her daughter's laughter helped soothe her nerves. But just as she was flipping the last pancake, her phone buzzed on the counter. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart racing as she read the message. "Clara, meet me at the foundation office at noon. We need to talk. James." Clara's stomach churned. The urgency in his words was impossible to ignore. She quickly finished breakfast and got the girls ready for daycare, her mind spinning with questions. What had James uncovered? And more importantly, what would it mean for her family? By the time Clara arrived at the foundation office, her nerves were frayed. James was waiting for her in the lobby, his expression serious but calm. He greeted her with a nod and gestured for her to follow him into a private meeting room. As soon as the door closed, Clara couldn't hold back her questions. "What's going on, James? Did something happen?" James sat down across from her, placing a thick folder on the table. "Clara, I've been digging deeper into Frank's background," he began, his tone measured. "What I've found confirms everything you've told me. And then some." He opened the folder, revealing pages of documents, photographs, and reports. "Frank isn't just a petty manipulator," James continued. "He's built a career out of exploiting vulnerable people. He uses fear and intimidation to get what he wants, and he's left a trail of destruction in his wake." Clara leaned forward, her eyes scanning the papers. "What do you mean?" "Loan sharking, illegal property seizures, fraudulent business practices," James listed, pointing to each item in the folder. "He's been preying on families like yours for years. But the good news is he's sloppy. He's left enough evidence to build a strong case against him." Clara's breath caught. "A case? You mean we can stop him?" James nodded. "Yes, but it won't be easy. People like Frank don't go down without a fight. He'll try to intimidate you, make you doubt yourself. But if we stand our ground, we can take him down." Clara swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. "What do I need to do?" "For now, nothing," James said. "I've already hired a legal team to start gathering evidence. They're working with local authorities to build a case. What I need from you is to stay focused on your goals, your job training, your girls, your future. Let me handle the fight." Clara nodded slowly, though doubt flickered in her eyes. "What if he comes after me again? What if he tries to hurt my daughters?" James's expression hardened. "He won't," he said firmly. "I've taken steps to ensure your safety. Private security is watching the building, and we've alerted the local police. Frank's not getting near you or the girls." Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear was hard to shake. "I'm scared, James," she admitted, her voice trembling. "What if this doesn't work?" James reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "It will work," he said softly. "You're not alone in this. I promise. We'll get through it together." That afternoon, Clara returned to the apartment, her mind spinning with everything James had told her. Sophie and Emma were still at daycare, giving her a rare moment of quiet. She sat on the couch, staring at the folder James had given her. It was filled with evidence of Frank's crimes, Names, dates, transactions. It was overwhelming, but it also gave her a sense of hope. For the first time, she felt like she had a real chance to fight back. As she flipped through the pages, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. Clara hesitated before answering, her heart pounding. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Clara," Frank's voice drawled, sending a chill down her spine. "I see you've been busy." Her blood ran cold. "What do you want, Frank?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "What's mine?" he replied. "You think you can run to some do-gooder and hide from me? Think again. You're playing a dangerous game." Clara's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. Frank chuckled darkly. "You should be," he said. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Clara sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The fear she'd been holding at bay threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. She couldn't let Frank win. Not this time. That evening, Clara called James to tell him about the phone call. He listened intently, his voice calm and steady as he reassured her. "Clara, this is exactly why we're taking action," he said. "Frank's trying to scare you into submission. Don't let him." "I'm trying," Clara said, her voice trembling. "But it's hard." "I know," James said softly. "But you're stronger than you think. Just hold on a little longer. We're going to end this." After hanging up, Clara sat in the quiet of her apartment, watching the city lights twinkle outside the window. She thought about Sophie and Emma, about the life she wanted to build for them. Frank had taken so much from her already, but she refused to let him take their future. As the night wore on, Clara felt a flicker of determination ignite within her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her daughters, for their chance at a better life. And no matter how dark things seemed, she wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. The evening was unusually quiet, the calm before the storm. Clara sat in the living room, the folder James had given her spread out on the coffee table. Every name, date, and transaction listed on the documents was a piece of a puzzle that painted Frank as a man who thrived on fear and exploitation. She ran her fingers over the pages, her mind racing. The more she learned about Frank, the more she realized just how deep his schemes ran and how dangerous he truly was. Sophie and Emma were already in bed, their soft breathing a comforting reminder of why Clara couldn't give up. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. She should have been asleep, but her mind wouldn't rest. Frank's phone call earlier in the day had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. The sharp knock at the door shattered the silence, making her jump. Her heart raced as she stood, every nerve in her body on high alert. Peeking through the peephole, her worst fear was confirmed. Frank was standing there, his face a mix of smug confidence and barely restrained menace. "Clara," he called, his voice muffled through the door. "We need to talk." Clara froze, her mind scrambling for what to do. She grabbed her phone and dialed James, her hands shaking as she whispered into the receiver, "He's here." James's voice was steady and reassuring. "Stay calm, Clara. Lock the door and don't engage with him. I'm on my way." Security should already be there. As if on cue, another knock echoed through the apartment. "Don't make me wait, Clara," Frank said, his tone darkening. "You know I hate waiting." Clara's fear quickly turned to anger. She was tired of being scared, tired of letting Frank control her. Taking a deep breath, she called through the door, "You need to leave, Frank. You're not welcome here." Frank laughed, a chilling sound that made her stomach churn. "Oh, come on," he said mockingly. "You think you can shut me out? After everything I've done for you? Open the door, Clara, or I'll open for you." Her hand tightened on the phone as she whispered, "He's threatening to break in." James's voice was sharp. "Stay where you are. Security is seconds away." As the tension in the air thickened, Clara heard footsteps approaching. Suddenly, a voice she didn't recognize spoke up. "Mr. Mitchell, you need to leave the premises immediately." Frank turned, his smugness faltering as he saw two security guards standing at the end of the hallway. "This is none of your business," he snarled. "Get out of my way." "Is our business," one of the guards replied calmly. "You're trespassing and making threats. Leave now, or we'll call the police." Frank hesitated, his eyes darting between the guards and the door. Clara held her breath, her ear pressed to the door as she listened to the exchange. After what felt like an eternity, Frank sneered and backed away. "This isn't over," he spat before storming off. Clara exhaled, her knees buckling as relief flooded her. Moments later, her phone buzzed. It was James. "I'm downstairs," he said. "Let me up." When James entered the apartment, Clara was still shaken but trying to hold herself together. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. Clara nodded, though her hands trembled as she crossed her arms. "He said it wasn't over," she whispered. "What if he comes back?" "He won't," James said, his tone resolute. "Not after tonight. The police are already filing a report, and we're doubling the security presence around the building. If he so much as steps foot on this property again, he'll be arrested." Clara sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I don't understand why he's doing this," she said, her voice breaking. "He already ruined my life once. What more does he want?" James sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about what he wants," he said. "It's about control. People like Frank thrive on making others feel powerless. But you're not powerless, Clara. You've taken the first steps toward rebuilding your life, and that scares him. He knows he's losing his grip on you." Clara looked up, her eyes filled with doubt. "But what if he finds another way to hurt us? I can't keep living like this, James." "You won't have to," James said firmly. "I've been working with my legal team to fast-track the case against him. We've uncovered enough evidence to take him down, and after tonight, we'll have even more." Clara nodded slowly, her resolve strengthening. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Keep going," James said simply. "Focus on your girls, your training, and your future. Let me handle Frank." The next morning, Clara woke to a knock on her door. She tensed, but when she checked the peephole, she saw James standing there with a determined expression and a newspaper in his hand. "Good morning," he said as she opened the door. "You'll want to see this." He handed her the paper, and her eyes widened as she read the headline, "Local businessman exposed for fraud and intimidation. Legal action pending." Below the headline was a photo of Frank, looking disheveled and furious. "They published this last night," James explained. "The story's already gaining traction. More victims are coming forward, and the authorities are taking notice. This is the beginning of the end for him." Clara stared at the paper, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. "You did this," she said, her voice trembling. "You're really taking him down." "We are," James corrected her. "You're not alone in this, Clara. You never were." For the first time in weeks, Clara allowed herself to hope. Frank's power was crumbling, and with James's help, she was reclaiming her life. As Sophie and Emma ran into the living room, giggling and holding their drawings, Clara smiled. This was what she was fighting for, her daughters, their future, and the chance to finally break free from the shadows of her past. The apartment felt different that morning, as though the air itself was lighter. Clara woke to the sound of Sophie and Emma laughing as they played in their room, their voices bubbling with joy. The tension that had hung over her for so long was finally beginning to lift. The headline in the newspaper from the day before had marked a turning point. Frank's influence was crumbling, and for the first time, Clara felt like she could breathe. As she stepped into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, Clara caught a glimpse of the drawings her daughters had taped to the wall. Stick figure families, Bright suns and houses with colorful flowers lined the small dining area. One picture caught her eye. A drawing of Clara, Sophie, Emma, and James standing in front of an apartment building, their stick figure arms linked. Clara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from James. "I'll be over this afternoon. Let's talk about next steps." Clara sighed, the weight of the unknown pressing lightly on her shoulders. She wasn't sure what next steps meant, but she knew James would guide her through it. For now, she focused on the small victories, her daughter's laughter, a safe place to call home, and the knowledge that Frank's threats were losing their power. By the time James arrived, Sophie and Emma were busy playing in the living room, their giggles echoing down the hall. Clara opened the door to find James standing there with his usual calm demeanor, a folder in one hand and a warm smile on his face. "Good to see you, Clara," he said as he stepped inside. "You too," she replied, closing the door behind him. "The girls are in the living room if you want to say hi." James grinned. "I'll stop by before I leave, but first let's talk." He motioned to the kitchen table, where Clara joined him. James set the folder on the table and opened it, revealing several documents. "We're making progress," he began. "Frank's legal troubles are piling up. The authorities are moving quickly, and with the new evidence, it's only a matter of time before he's fully prosecuted." Clara exhaled, relief washing over her. "That's good news," she said, though her voice carried a hint of uncertainty. "It is," James agreed, "but I know this hasn't been easy for you, and I know it's hard to believe that this chapter of your life is almost over." Clara nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "It feels surreal," she admitted. "For so long, I've been in survival mode. I don't know how to just live." James leaned forward, his expression kind but firm. "That's what we're going to work on next," he said. "You've taken the first steps, moving into this apartment, enrolling in the Foundation's programs, standing up to Frank. Now it's time to focus on building a future for you and the girls." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I don't even know where to start," she said softly. "That's why I'm here," James replied. He pulled out a list from the folder and slid it across the table. "This is a roadmap," he explained. "It outlines your goals for the next 6 months, job placement, financial planning, even finding a permanent home. You don't have to do it all at once, but having a plan will help." Clara studied the list, her heart pounding as she read through the steps. Each item felt daunting, but James's confidence in her gave her a glimmer of hope. "You really think I can do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you can," James said firmly. "You've already proven how strong you are. This is just the next step." Later that afternoon, Sophie and Emma tugged at James's sleeve, holding up their latest creation, a drawing of a big, colorful house with a bright sun overhead. "This is our future house," Sophie announced proudly. James knelt down, taking the drawing with a smile. "It's beautiful," he said. "I think it's going to happen sooner than you think." The girls beamed, their joy infectious. Clara watched from the kitchen, her chest tightening with emotion. For so long, she had felt like she was failing her daughters, but seeing their happiness now filled her with a sense of purpose. As James prepared to leave, Clara walked him to the door. "James," she said hesitantly, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you." James shook his head, his smile gentle. "You don't owe me anything, Clara," he said. "Just promise me you'll keep moving forward. That's all the thanks I need." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I will," she said. "I promise." James hesitated for a moment, then added, "And remember, you're not alone. You have the Foundation, and you have me. We're in this together." That evening, Clara sat on the couch with Sophie, and Emma curled up beside her. They watched a movie together, their laughter filling the small apartment. For the first time in months, Clara felt a sense of peace. The storm that had consumed her life was finally clearing, and in its place was the promise of a brighter future. As the credits rolled, Sophie looked up at Clara and said, "Mommy, are we going to be okay now?" Clara smiled, her heart swelling with love for her daughters. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're going to be more than okay." Emma yawned, snuggling closer to her mother. "I like our new home," she murmured sleepily. Clara kissed the top of her head. "Me too," she whispered. "Me too." As Clara tucked her daughters into bed that night, she reflected on how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy, and she knew there were still challenges ahead, but she finally felt like she was on solid ground. With James's support and the resources from a foundation, she had a plan, and more importantly, she had hope. Standing by the window, Clara looked out at the city lights and allowed herself to dream. For the first time in a long time, the future felt like something to look forward to, not something to fear. And as she turned away from the window and headed to bed, she carried with her the quiet strength of a woman who had faced the darkness and found her way to the light. And now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives like this. Each subscription helps us continue bringing exciting stories to you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.